So first of all then you need to look carefully at your data and your numbers on the table in front of you and just check for the lowest for the temperature across the year, and that's 27, and then look for the highest temperature and mark them on. Then I suggest you do the same thing for the rainfall, mark the lowest and then the highest. This will help you when you plot your graph. Okay, so then you have your graph paper. Please use a pencil. You'll also need a ruler. I always like to start 2 centimetres in from the left margin, and if you start maybe 1 or 2 centimetres from the top of the graph paper, and then I just drew my line based on how many squares I was going to use. So I went up in half a degree at a time. So I started at 0 and I went up to 29, I think. If you look at from 26 as your first number, try and do it a bit straighter than me. And then I drew a cross on the horizontal axis for the months of the year, so you need 12 centimetres. Then what you can do once you've drawn that is you can mark just a tiny mark with a pencil as an indicator to show how far each centimetre is along, just to help you to see where each month starts and ends. And then if you write in the months of the year, starting at January, ending in December, just use the first letter. Okay, then on the right hand side, on the other axes, so you'll have 2 axes, one for climate, for the temperature, and one for precipitation, for the rainfall. So if you draw up the same distance up the axis here, and so as you can see I'm marking on again my indicators for the edge of each centimetre on both sides on the left and right axes. Then I just labelled my lower horizontal axis with the months, and then I'm going to start with my temperature. So starting at 0, and then my first temperature I'm starting with is 26, then I'm going up 26.5, 27, and so on. As you can see, there's no point in starting on a lower temperature because you have a very small range in temperatures for the first graph for the Java in Indonesia. So you can see I finished mine on 29.5 degrees centigrade. On the other axis, on the right hand side, this is your rainfall or your precipitation. I start at 0 and I go up in 50 millimetres, 100, 150, 200 millimetres, and so on. And then my top figure will be 400 millimetres. Then just take care to make sure that you label your axes. So this one will be my precipitation on the right hand side, and that's in millimetres. And then on my left hand side I will label my axes for the climate or for the temperature, and that one is measured in degrees centigrade or Celsius. Now I'm going to start to input the data. So you need to go back to your list on your table and look at your data for your temperature starting in January. So it's 27.5 degrees. For this one you've got to read from your left axis and put your cross in the middle of your square. So that is ½ centimetre across. And so for each bit of data that you read, use the left axis and obviously look at the month at the bottom, read across, and then put your cross in the middle of each square with a pencil. Just be very careful as you go to ensure that you are reading the right graph and the right numbers. It's very easy to accidentally make a mistake. Okay, when you have finished all of your crosses, you just join them freehand, very carefully. You can do it quite lightly, don't need to use a ruler. Join each cross one to the other. This will create your line graph for your temperature. Now, although there isn't much of a difference in temperature, the graph is quite detailed, so you can see that you have actually completed it. Now, just have a look at your rainfall numbers and start on January. This is the tricky bit where most people make mistakes, so look carefully. So we start on the right axis. We take the number, which was 335 millimetres. You read from the right, put your ruler across, but you're doing this for January. So you have to draw to the left for January, and that is a bar graph. You need to just draw a bar for each of the months of the year. So read the data really carefully. So that's 241 millimetres. And then again, look back on the right axis, work out where your 241 is. It might be quite tricky on your scale. You might need to just do it as close to it as you possibly can. And then draw your bar for February. Okay, keeping it nice and straight. If you do make a mistake, use a pencil, you can rub it out. Now, just while I'm drawing this, I'll just point out to you that as you can see, my temperature, as it goes up in half a degree at a time, although it looks like it varies quite a lot, it's only varying by a very small amount. So it's only varying by about half a degree or a couple of degrees in total, whilst the rainfall starts at 335 and goes as low as 50, and then it goes all the way up to 335, so it's quite a big difference in the bar graph. So just be careful when you're doing your interpretation of the graph that you do look back at the numbers, because just relying on the actual pattern of the graph might not be quite as accurate from your eye. To fix this issue, what you could do is you could go up in a degree at a time and make your scale bar on the left side, your scale for temperature, a lot smaller. Okay, so as you go across the year, just be very careful to make sure you continue to read correctly the numbers. It's very easy to make a mistake, and you'll see in a second that I had a little bit of trouble later on with the numbers when they got quite close together. So like here. So obviously if you have a pencil, you can always rub that out. Okay, so approaching the end of the year, you can plot the rest of the numbers 151. This will be only slightly above the 150 mark. And then obviously December 193. Okay, so then once you are finished and you've completed your graph, it should look just something a bit like this. Just make sure, like I say, you followed very carefully. Try and do it as neatly as you can. Then what you're going to do next is to make the graph a little bit easier to see and to interpret. You need to take a colouring pencil, ideally a pencil rather than a pen. Use the red to go over the line graph of the temperature, which is always shown in red as it shows the warmth or the heat. So that one in red, go over the pencil, and then again use another colouring pencil, so ideally blue, and then just lightly shade and colour your bars. It doesn't need to be really hard, so just kind of go across it lightly, try and keep it neat. I suggest pencil rather than pen. Good practice should be using colouring pencils, and pencils to draw a graph and pens to label. There we go, so your graph is nearly finished. Just a few last final touches that you'll need. And we always finish a graph with a title. I like to start my titles graph to show, to explain what the graph is showing. And then this one will be showing the temperature and the rainfall, so the temperature and the precipitation. So I've got graph to show the precipitation and the temperature of or across the year. And then obviously you've got to include the place in which you're doing the graph on, which in this case will be Indonesia, and it's Java, okay? And then finish that off by just using your ruler and underline your title. Obviously you've got quite a bit of room left on your paper if you do it the same way as I did, so if you want to use that extra space, that is where your climate graph from Madagascar could go, and I suggest that you think carefully about your numbers and how you're going to work out your spacing before you finish. And that is what your graph should look like when finished. And good luck with creating your own climate graphs.